What a weekend we had at Suzuka. The 2025 Japanese Grand Prix wasn't just another race. It was a defining chapter in this season's narrative. Because here we didn't just see speed, we saw redemption. We saw pain. We saw strategy. We saw teams on the brink and drivers leaving their souls on the sacred Suzuka track. Red Bull got its hopes up. McLaren reaffirmed that it's stronger than ever. Ferrari continues to fall into an abyss from which it finds no way out. And Mercedes, pay attention. Because they're coming back step by step, lap after lap. But what happened this weekend goes far beyond the results. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything. So get comfortable. Because we're kicking off with one of the most comprehensive analyses you'll find in the entire Spanish-language Formula One community. What happened with Red Bull at Suzuka was a declaration of principles. They didn't just win the race, they didn't just take pole position. Red Bull regained narrative control of the season, demonstrating why they remain the team to beat in the modern era of Formula One. Max Verstappen didn't win through luck or strategy. He won with a technical and mental superiority that is hard to question. It was a surgical victory, meticulously executed from qualifying to the final lap. It was the perfect response to the team's most questionable start to the year since the 2021 season. And it was also a warning. A warning that dominance is still latent. That when Red Bull sets its mind to it, its rivals disappear. The weekend began with clear signs of confidence. Verstappen went into qualifying knowing he had a solid package, and he achieved an out-of-this-world lap, 1 minute and 26.983 seconds. A new overall record at Suzuka. A lap that not only placed him ahead of Norris by 12 thousandths of a second, but also shattered the record set by Sebastian Vettel in 2019. This wasn't just another pole position. It was a final victory. And the interesting thing is that, despite the criticism and media hype of the previous weeks, Red Bull didn't arrive with a revved-up car. They didn't make radical changes. They didn't redesign the car. What they did was apply smart, targeted improvements to critical areas of the RB21 that were limiting its performance. They worked on the engine cover to reduce aerodynamic losses, especially those caused by the interaction between the upper and lower rear wings. They adjusted the cooling system. They optimized the exhaust airflow at the rear, passing it exactly through the ideal gap between the main wing and the beam wing, minimizing turbulence. In other words, they didn't aim for raw power, they aimed for efficiency. Something that translates into real tenths of a second at Suzuka, and ultimately into victories. Paul Monahan explained it clearly after the race. If you manage to channel the cooling outlet correctly, that same airflow doesn't disturb the rear wing and becomes a clean, functional flow. Basically, you turn a problem area into a competitive advantage. And Red Bull did it. With precision. With confidence. With knowledge. During the race, Verstappen led 43 of the 53 laps. His pace was controlled without overloading the car, without taking risks. He knew he had the necessary margin and managed it like a driver who has learned to win with a cool head. The result was a victory by less than a second and a half over Lando Norris, but with a visual dominance that made it seem like he had a 5-second advantage for almost the entire race. That's the difference between a driver who manages and one who just pushes. And while Max was doing his part, the real surprise came from the other side of the pit box. Because this race was Yuki Tsunoda's official debut as a Red Bull Racing regular. And not at just any circuit. He did it in his home country. At Suzuka. In front of his home crowd. A moment that would change everything in his career. The move to promote Tsunoda from Racing Bulls wasn't announced with much fanfare. It was discreet, almost unexpected. Even Laurent Mekies, Racing Bulls team principal, admitted they didn't see it coming. But the decision was made. And behind it lay several key factors. The alliance with Honda, Red Bull's political strategy in Asia, and above all, the need to have a second driver who wouldn't cause conflicts, but would instead fulfill tactical functions. A disciplined wingman. Someone who wouldn't compete against Verstappen, but would be close enough to help contain rivals in the race, fill strategic gaps, slow down undercuts, play with traffic, protect against midfield threats, or serve as a tactical card in crucial moments. Christian Horner was very clear with Yuki before the weekend. His mission wasn't to show off or prove he could win. His mission was simple, to be as close to Max as possible. That closeness wasn't just physical on the track, it was symbolic. It meant acting as an extension of Red Bull's master plan. Yuki only half delivered. He qualified 14th, finished 12th. He didn't score any points. But what matters is that he didn't make any serious mistakes. That he was where he needed to be. And that, for the first time in his career, he wasn't racing for himself, but for the team. In a world where drivers are trained to be self-centered and think only of themselves, that's a huge change. And what's more, this debut marks a new era for the Japanese driver. Because now the comparisons won't be with Gasly or Ricciardo. Now the mirror is Verstappen. Now the margin for error disappears. Now he's in an environment where results aren't celebrated, they're demanded. And that can transform him or destroy him. There's another technical detail that many overlooked. The RB21 at Suzuka was one of the most stable cars in high-speed corners, especially in the SEs of the first sector, where Verstappen not only maintained the pace but also managed to pull away from the McLarens on key laps of the race. This speaks to perfect aerodynamic balance, something Red Bull had partially lost in the early rounds of the championship. With this improved version of the car, that balance has returned. And with it, the fear of the rest of the field has returned. Because the truth is, beyond track advantage or strategy, Red Bull has regained the technical initiative. They're no longer reacting to what McLaren or Ferrari do. Now they're once again dictating the pace, setting the agenda. And when that happens, as we've seen many times before, the grid trembles. The big question that remains is whether this was an isolated flash or the beginning of a new era of dominance. Because McLaren is too close. Because Mercedes is moving forward. And because if Ferrari manages to resolve its structural problems, it can re-enter the conversation. But today, after Suzuka, the truth is clear. Red Bull is still Red Bull. And Max Verstappen, when he aligns himself with his team, when the car responds, when the strategy is right, he is almost unbeatable. Suzuka was more than a victory. It was a show of authority. And we may have witnessed, in silence, the resurgence of the empire. What McLaren is doing this season isn't a coincidence, nor is it luck. And it's certainly not a streak. It's the result of a structure that has managed to reinvent itself from the ground up, and that today, without needing to shout about it, has become Red Bull's greatest direct rival. Suzuka was simply another confirmation, but a very powerful one. In qualifying, Lando Norris was just 0.012 seconds off pole position. A microscopic difference, imperceptible to the human eye, but one that is everything in Formula One. That number, more than a statistic, is a warning. McLaren isn't close. It's exactly there. Within millimeters. Within thousands. The double podium in Japan, with Norris second and Oscar Piastri third, wasn't the product of a chaotic race, retirements, or external factors. It was pure consistency. It was absolute merit. And the most impressive thing is that, if you analyze the performance sector by sector, the MCL 39 wasn't just competitive, it was dominant in several sections of the circuit. In the second sector, for example, where medium-speed corners require a balance between lateral grip and traction at the exit, McLaren was the fastest. Norris led the split time sheets there, with Piastri close behind, just a tenth behind. This shows that the car isn't just good on paper, but also translates that potential into every type of corner. But what really makes the difference this year isn't just the single-lap pace or the balance in the technical sectors. It's the car's versatility. The MCL 39 performs optimally on high-load circuits like Suzuka, but also on slower or low-degradation layouts. This is a rarity in this era of ultra-complex cars, where every team seems to have one track that favors them and another that kills their performance. McLaren, on the other hand, has found something very difficult to achieve: a universal car. This is no coincidence. Andrea Stella warned about it weeks ago. The team has adopted a philosophy of continuous, incremental development. They're not banking on a massive update every 3 or 4 races. They're working every week, in every factory, in every simulation, to bring in small parts, fine-tuning, micro-improvements. But constantly. It's a surgical approach. A technical trickle-down strategy that's yielding real results on the track. And this is especially relevant because Red Bull has thrived on big leaps. Big innovations, big evolutions. McLaren, on the other hand, is applying the Japanese engineering of continuous improvement. And when that mentality is combined with a talented driver duo and a solid structure like the one they're building in Woking, the result is exactly what we saw in Japan: consistency at the highest level. Now, there's one criticism we can't ignore, and it comes from within the community. Because despite having the pace to win, McLaren wasn't aggressive enough strategically. Most analysts anticipated a one-stop race due to the new asphalt layer in the first sector and the reduction in tire degradation. But some believe that McLaren, by following that expected script, missed the opportunity to try something different. In other words, they raced to consolidate, not to take risks. And that mentality, while it guarantees podiums, can cost you championships. Because while Red Bull exploits every inch, every rival error, every strategic window to impose its power, McLaren seems to have yet to develop that killer instinct that turns a fast car into a championship car. What we saw in Japan was a moral victory for McLaren, but not a real victory. And that's important, because it means there's still a barrier, however minimal, between them and Red Bull. A barrier that isn't in the car, not even in the drivers. It's in the decision-making. Lando Norris, for his part, continues to establish himself as one of the most consistent talents of his generation. Suzuka was another demonstration of maturity, of pace, of commitment. He's racing at the level of the world champions, and he's doing it with a team that believes in him. But there's also one detail that doesn't go unnoticed. He's no longer content with second place. He made it clear on the radio. He made it clear in his actions. He wants more, and he wants it now. Oscar Piastri, on the other hand, continues his growth process, but his progression is so solid that it's no longer surprising to see him on the podium. What's surprising is the ease with which he's grasping this level of demand. At Suzuka, he was cerebral, fast, strategic. He knows his time will come, and he's preparing for it lap after lap. McLaren, as a team, is brimming with confidence, but it's also under pressure. Because when you have the best car of the year or one of the two best, expectations are unforgiving. And while the public and the press are fascinated by their return to the front, the learning period is over. Now they have to win. Andrea Stella knows it. Zach Brown knows it. The whole factory knows it. They're in their best technical position since 2012. And every race that doesn't result in a victory is a missed opportunity. Therefore, what happens in the next 3 races will be key. Not just in terms of points, but also in terms of mentality. McLaren has to decide whether it wants to be the team that makes things difficult for Red Bull or the team that dethrones Red Bull. And that difference isn't in the wind tunnel. It's on the pit wall, on the scoreboard, in the undercuts, in the decisions, at the precise moment when everything is defined. Suzuka was the best round of the year for the MCL 39. And while they didn't take the win, they took home something perhaps more valuable, the respect of the entire grid. And if they can translate that into competitive hunger, Red Bull will never sleep peacefully again. Ferrari is at a critical point, and it's not just another crisis. It's not a temporary setback. What the Scuderia is going through this 2025 season is an existential, structural, emotional, and technical crisis. One of those that can't be solved with an aerodynamic update or a one-off victory. An identity crisis. Because while Red Bull continues to execute its championship plan with precision, while McLaren proves to be the most balanced car on the grid, and while Mercedes takes solid steps toward a comeback, Ferrari continues to search for answers. And it can't find them. Suzuka was the perfect reflection of that confusion. Charles Leclerc salvaged a 4th place finish. An acceptable result if you look at it on paper, but one that is completely disconnected from what Ferrari stands for. The problem is that no one is surprised anymore. It's no longer an exception. It's the new normal. Today, Ferrari is competing to be the 3rd or 4th best team. And the worst part is that he no longer seems to have the tools or the time to reverse it. Lewis Hamilton, in his new role as Ferrari driver, finished 7th. And beyond his position in the standings, what was alarming was what he said after the race. "I'm losing more than a 10th per lap due to a problem we've been dealing with for the past 3 Grands Prix." That phrase, uttered by a 7-time world champion, in one of the most legendary teams in the history of the sport, should set off every possible alarm bell. Because it's not a one-off complaint. It's an admission. A confession that something profound is wrong with the SF25. And this is where the technical analysis begins to reveal the truth. Ferrari is dealing with a car that has fundamental problems at the rear. It's not a superficial aerodynamic issue. It's not a configuration fault. It's a structural one. Everything points to the SF25 having a design that limits the rear axle's performance, forcing the car to roll higher than optimally, and creating a dysfunctional interaction between downforce and mechanical performance. Sky Sports F1 Simon Lazenby described it with surgical precision. There's a problem with the rear of the car. They're trying to work around it now, but there will come a time when they'll have to admit they're not going to be able to fix it this year. And when a paddock insider speaks to you like this, they do so with real knowledge, not speculation. Because the rumors within the paddock are consistent. Ferrari is not only losing pace because of this defect, but is seriously considering redirecting all its resources toward 2026. In other words, they could abandon development of this car mid-season. Give up. Raise the white flag before the summer break even arrives. And while strategically it may be sensible, symbolically it would be devastating. The car doesn't just have problems at the rear. It also suffers from tire overheating, especially on high-load circuits like Suzuka. And on a track where aerodynamic efficiency is everything, the SF25 delivers downforce, but doesn't manage it properly. It generates too much energy through the tires. It overheats. It loses grip. And consequently, it compromises both entry and exit of key corners. It's a vicious cycle, and Ferrari seems trapped in it. To top it all off, the first 3 races of the year had already revealed serious signs. Hamilton was disqualified from the Chinese Grand Prix due to uneven wear on the wooden floorboard. That's usually a symptom of poor height distribution, of a lack of rebound control. And that's where the pattern begins to form. This car isn't just inconsistent, it's unpredictable. And that, in modern Formula One, is a death sentence. Because in such a tight championship, with such minimal margins, if you can't trust that your car will perform the same lap after lap, you're out of the game. Charles Leclerc is giving everything he has. He's matured. He's cooler, more calculating, more consistent. But he doesn't have the tools. And Lewis Hamilton, who came to Ferrari looking for one last great chance at glory, is facing one of the most frustrating stages of his career. Because there's nothing more desperate for a champion driver than knowing exactly what he needs to do, but not having the car to do it. The paddock knows it. The rivals know it. And the most painful thing is that Ferrari knows it too. The team seems to be running against its own history, against its own myth. Because every time they finish 4th or 5th, it's not just another result. It's a stab in the memory of what they once were. The fans are starting to resign themselves. The Italian press, always ferocious, is starting to talk not about mistakes, but about inadequacies. And the word repeated most is the one no fan wants to hear again: reconstruction. But reconstruction of what? Of a team that hasn't won the Drivers' Championship since 2007? Of a structure that has changed leaders, technical chiefs, drivers, philosophies, and still can't find its way? The big question now isn't whether Ferrari can fight for the championship this year. The real question is whether they can build a winning car before 2026. Because if this cycle repeats itself once more, if they fail to make the leap in 2025, then it won't just be another lost season. It will be a lost generation. And that's where it hurts the most. Because Ferrari isn't just any team. It's the most iconic team in Formula One. It's pure history. And seeing it trapped in a labyrinth of mistakes, of botched patches, of broken promises, is a sporting tragedy. Suzuka was proof that today Ferrari is far from everything. Far from Red Bull. Far from McLaren. And increasingly far from itself. The SF25 isn't a slow car. It's an incomplete car. And in this category, that means exactly the same thing. The season isn't yet lost in mathematical terms. But what's being lost is more valuable: credibility. And once you lose it, the road back is much longer than any lap at Suzuka. Mercedes has chosen the long road. The difficult road. The least spectacular, the least media-driven. And yet, the most consistent. And that, in this 2025 Formula One dominated by explosive narratives and teams that thrive on immediate impact, seems almost countercultural. Because while Red Bull continues to capitalize on Verstappen's supreme talent, while McLaren plays with the precision of modern engineering, and Ferrari drowns in its own contradictions, Mercedes has opted for a surgical, patient, and silent reconstruction. And in Japan, the results began to show with a clarity that cannot be ignored. George Russell finished 5th. Kimi Antonelli 6th. And beyond the points and positions, the general feeling in the paddock is clear. Mercedes has found something. Suzuka wasn't a chaotic race, nor a GP marked by retirements that distort the natural order. It was a pure test of performance, of real pace, of consistency. And Mercedes passed that test with flying colors. Andrew Chauvelin, head of track engineering, summed it up with a phrase that may seem trivial to the untrained eye, but speaks volumes. This car no longer has the flaws of recent years. A phrase that encapsulates Mercedes' true success in this new era. Because if there's one thing that has tormented this team since 2022, it's unpredictability. Nervous cars. Impossible setups. Aerodynamic jumps. Lack of correlation between simulator and track. Chronic instability. All of that was the post-W13 legacy. And the W6 seems to have finally laid those ghosts to rest. It's not just about the car being faster. It's about the drivers trusting it. And that, in modern Formula One, is the first step toward building sustainable results. The credit lies in the engineering. Because unlike other seasons, Mercedes didn't opt for a design revolution, but rather for a structural refinement. The car's concept was fundamentally tweaked. The interaction between the axles was improved, dynamic handling in fast and slow corners was balanced, and above all, progressive load distribution was achieved. This translates into a car that responds better to aggressive driving and suffers fewer performance variations with different fuel levels and tire wear. And this was evident with absolute clarity at Suzuka. Russell, who formally assumed the role of leader within the team after Hamilton's departure, drove a solid, clean, and technical race. And although he finished fifth, he himself admitted that he paid a heavy price for a poor qualifying. This tells us that, had he started higher, he had a car to fight for the podium. But the great silent protagonist of the weekend was Kimi Antonelli. The Italian rookie, who was just taking his first steps in the category, led the race for 10 laps. 10 laps in which Mercedes wasn't reacting to the pace of the leaders, but rather imposing it. 10 laps that showed that, when strategy, conditions, and traffic align, the W6 has the pace to lead. That seemingly brief moment was symbolic of a profound change, because Mercedes hadn't been at the front under normal conditions for 2 years. And seeing a rookie like Antonelli leading with composure, without mistakes, without locking tires or losing pace, was a declaration that the future is no longer under construction. It's underway. James Allison, the team's technical director, had anticipated this. He said Mercedes would bring small improvements to each Grand Prix, that it wasn't a mega evolution, but rather a meticulous progression. At Suzuka, the car debuted a new high downforce rear wing as well as a revised beam wing specification, tuned to maximize efficiency in high-speed corners without compromising corner exit. And the most important thing is that these parts worked as designed. Mercedes isn't racing to impress. They're racing to understand, to consolidate. And that's much more valuable in the long run, because they're not looking for a sporadic victory. They're laying the foundations for a new winning cycle. And if there's a driver who embodies that philosophy, it's George Russell. He was always fast, but now he's something more. He's steady, he's intelligent, he's a leader. He's taken on the pressure of leading a historic team under reconstruction, and he's doing it without the noise, without the ego, without the anxiety that sometimes ruins great talents. Russell has grown, and his maturity is proportional to the car's evolution. Antonelli, for his part, has shown in just a few races that he's not an experiment. He's a real project. He's cold-blooded. He has control. He has vision. And the most interesting thing is that he's not trying to emulate Hamilton or replicate Russell. He's building his own style. An aggressive but clean style. Technical but bold. And if Mercedes manages to maintain this progression, Antonelli will be one of the dominant names of the second half of this decade. Now the team still has a gap to close. With McLaren. With Red Bull. Especially in terms of pure qualifying. Single-lap speed is still not its strongest suit, and that limits its strategic options on Sundays. But Andrew Chauvelin made it clear. Development is no longer a lottery. We know exactly what we're looking for, and we're going to find it. That phrase sums it up. Mercedes isn't racing to survive. It's racing to come back, and it's doing so with a plan, with a foundation, with a horizon. Suzuka was just the beginning. And if the other teams don't pay attention, Mercedes will return to the top sooner than many imagine. Japan wasn't just another Grand Prix on the calendar. It was a mirror. One that reflected with brutal clarity the true power dynamics of this 2025 season. Suzuka, with its surgically precise layout, doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't hide shortcomings. And what this race revealed wasn't simply a leaderboard. It revealed intentions. It revealed levels. It revealed truths. Red Bull showed that it doesn't need to be dominant in every session to win when it matters. They set the bar high again. Verstappen didn't just win, he reaffirmed his leadership. And if the RB21 has regained the balance that seemed lost in the opening rounds of the year, then the fight for the title has just changed tone. But McLaren didn't leave defeated. Quite the opposite. They left strengthened, validated. The double podium wasn't a victory, but it was proof that the car is there, that the project is working. That consistency is on their side. And that, if they manage to sharpen their decisions in the race, they have the real potential to snatch victories away from Red Bull, even without relying on rival errors. The MCL39 was born to compete, not to wait. Ferrari, on the other hand, once again found its limits. A car that delivers less than it promises. A driver duo that demands much more than the car can provide. And a structure that seems to be struggling between the present and the future, unable to master either. Japan exposed the technical and emotional cracks of the greatest team in history, which today still doesn't know how to return to its place. And Mercedes surprised. Not with a podium, not with a magic lap, but with stability, with maturity, with structure. Russell leading without fanfare. Antonelli showing that this isn't a long-term project, but an immediate reality. And a car that, while not yet the fastest, is beginning to behave like a true contender. But beyond the names and flags, Suzuka left us with one certainty. The season is wide open. Red Bull is no longer untouchable. McLaren is no longer a promise. Mercedes is no longer an unknown quantity. And Ferrari? Ferrari will have to decide if it wants to continue competing or start over. And now comes the acid test, because what's coming up is a triple header that could change everything. Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. 3 circuits with extreme conditions, critical temperatures, tire abrasion, and technical challenges completely different from those in Japan. If Suzuka tested balance and efficiency, what's coming will test adaptability, reliability, and the ability to evolve. In Bahrain, rear-end degradation will be enemy number 1. A challenge Mercedes has already identified as its weakness in the past. There we'll see if its recent progress can be sustained in hostile climates. In Saudi Arabia, pure speed will be key. There, McLaren could have one of its best opportunities of the year. A high-speed street circuit where every thousandth of a second counts and where confidence in the car makes all the difference. And in Qatar, the desert heat and long corners will punish both the front end and the driver's physique. An extreme test for those with poorly balanced cars or cooling issues. The technical updates the teams prepare for this triple header will be significant. They will be strategic, vital. Because now, every little bit of progress can make the difference between victory and defeat. Because we're at that point in the season where the winner isn't the one who moves the fastest, but the one who makes the fewest mistakes. And that, historically, has been the specialty of champions. Japan left us with many images. But more importantly, it left us with questions. Can McLaren maintain the pace without strategic errors? Will Red Bull be able to stem Mercedes' silent growth? Does Ferrari have any cards up its sleeve, or is it already thinking about 2026? And how far can Kimi Antonelli go if Mercedes lets him? The answers will come. But what we already know is that the 2025 season is more alive than ever. And that, for those of us who passionately follow Formula One, is all we need. Do you want me to help you craft the perfect title with emotional focus, clickbait, and optimized SEO? Or would you like me to write a complete video description, including keywords, a professional structure, and a call to action? I can also help you plan the visual sections if you're editing with race clips. How would you like to proceed?